name is Amy Janess. I'm programming coordinator for the Nantucket Atheneum, which is the public library on the island of Nantucket. And so I'd like to say welcome and thank you for coming tonight. Most of you are probably pretty professional Zoom users at this point, but I just would like to point out that at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button and a Q&A button. And as we go along, if you have a question or a comment, please put in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll let the questions pile up. And then at the end of the program, Sarah and Sylvia will take questions. So you can put them in as we go along or put them in at the end. And before we begin, we're also gonna show a brief video. This tonight is the final lecture in our 2021 Geschke lecture series. And so we'd like to play a brief video in tribute to Chuck Geschke, who with his wife Nan founded the series in 2005. And then when the video is finished, the Nantucket Atheneum head librarian, Ann Scott, will introduce our speakers tonight.
And you need to unmute yourself.
Technology and innovation. The Nantucket Atheneum is a stronger and more vibrant library because of Nan and Chuck Geschke's vision and generosity. Chuck revolutionized software development, co-founding Adobe Ink and the PDF with John Warnock. He received many awards, including the nation's highest honor for technological achievement, the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. He and his wife, Nan Geschke, a former librarian, served on the Atheneum's board in the early 2000s and have supported many of the island's nonprofits with major donations over the decades. Chuck and Nan helped bring circus flora to the island as a fundraiser for the Atheneum, and later matched a National Endowment grant for the creation of the Geschke Lecture Series in 2005. Chuck and Nan's leadership has provided a solid foundation of excellence, and 16 years later, the Geschke Lectures have become the premier event to experience fascinating conversations around cutting-edge ideas. And all throughout, Chuck and Nan have remained involved in planning the series, as well as attending every lecture. For all that Chuck Geschke has meant to the Atheneum, to Nantucket, and to the community far beyond, we thank you and honor your legacy as we go forward with this evening's lecture and all that are to come.
Just want to say thank you again to Nan and the Geschke family, and thank you all for joining us for this final lecture in our 2021 series. Also want to thank our board for connecting us with some great speakers and our amazing staff, Amy Janess and Janet Forrest, in particular Amy for coordination of this series. And to all of you, your support means the world to us. We have to raise 75% of our operating budget every year. So if you'd like to donate, please visit nantucketatheneum.org. Now I'd like to welcome Her Deepness oceanographer Sylvia Earle, joined in conversation with Sarah Oktay, who is a chemical oceanographer at UC Davis, specializing in climate change research. And tonight they discuss the power and mystery of the world's oceans. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It's great to see you all here. I'm a big fan of the Nantucket Atheneum, of Amy, of everything that folks on Nantucket do for the ocean, and I'm a big fan of Sylvia. Both she and I are members of the Society for Women Geographers, and I was the past president, and we've got the current president attending in our audience, along with members from all over the world. So we're going to be talking a little bit about girl power and mentoring, but mainly about the oceans and about how the oceans protect us, how they have been taking it on the chin with climate change, what kind of challenges they face, and what we need to learn from the oceans, and what the oceans have to teach us, but all of the issues that are rapidly changing from moment to moment and day to day. And I really appreciate you all inviting me here back to my neck of the woods. I'll soon be back in this part of the ocean permanently starting January 1st. I'll be the new executive director for the Center for Coastal Studies there in Provincetown, Mass. And I'm very excited about that. But without further ado, I'm going to start just by asking Sylvia some questions. We'll do about 25, 30 minutes worth of questions. I'll put a little timer on so that I don't go on too far. And then we'll take questions from you and ask a little bit about what's happening with this beautiful part of the world around Nantucket, with so much oceanography and biodiversity around. If you have questions, please put them either in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll answer them after I've had a chance to interview Sylvia for a bit. So the first question is both the easiest and the hardest, depending on how you want to look at things. And it's my question for you is, what can the ocean teach us about resilience? We hear a lot about resilience and adaptation, and that's so important for the world because the world's changing and we have to adapt. So what kind of things can the ocean tell us about that?
It's the ocean, it's the blue and the green. Earth as one integrated system is resilient. We've seen over geological time enormous changes. Life, one way or the other, persists. Species come, ecosystems come, and they go. Extinctions occur, but life goes on. And I think what we're facing right now is not the resilience of life on Earth, in the ocean, or in deserts, or anywhere. It's the resilience of the planet in a way that will be maintained in our favor. And right now, because of our actions, we have undermined particularly the ocean that dominates the underpinnings of Earth's chemistry and temperature, whether it's climate, Earth is big nerdy word, biogeochemical system. It's a biogeochemical miracle, a living planet in a universe that, as far as we know, well, if there is life elsewhere, there are no koala bears, for sure. There are no human beings, for sure, or hermit crabs, or you name it. Life that is unique to this planet really depends on maintaining the systems more or less as we now have them. But in my lifetime, even in the lifetime of 10-year-olds, two things are remarkable that should cause us to sit up and take notice. One is how much has been lost, how much not only has been lost, but is accelerating in terms of loss. I mean, the fabric of life itself, ecosystems being burned or churned into housing developments and farms and cities and whatever else it is. We dominate the planet as one species that has converted so much of the natural life support that we have always taken for granted into things that we thought of, well, we use words like development or improved land when we level a forest and put up houses and things. That's one thing, the level of loss, but at the same time, it's the level of discovery, of learning. At the same time, we've lost more, we've learned more. In my lifetime, no question, enduring all preceding history. And we could, because of some of the same factors that enable us to destroy. It's the technology, our ability to get to places we could not access before. Until well along in the 20th century, most of the ocean was protected by its inaccessibility. And I count in that category of most of the ocean being the polar regions, the waters around the Antarctic continent, the continent itself, and of course, the Arctic, mostly, certainly under the ice, inaccessible. But now we can get there. We are getting there, and we're exploiting everything we touch. It seems if you can't put a dollar sign on it, it's in our way. Move over. It's underexploited. It's trashed. It's in the way of something useful, however we calculate things. Anyway.
No, that was a great introduction, really, to the A to Z of the whole, the whole pie for the ocean. And you touched on many of the questions that I want to get more deeply into. I'm sure on many people's minds this week is the recent report out, I think just a few days ago, about 14% of the coral reefs worldwide have been destroyed. There's numbers from year to year that show huge chunks of the Great Barrier Reef being bleached and losing the zooxanthella because of warmer sea surface temperatures. Some of them have regrown, but in the last decade, we've lost 14% of the global reefs, of which only comprise like 0.1% of the ocean, but 25% of the biodiversity.
Well, I'm not sure that last statement is true.
Okay.
25% of the biodiversity. I don't mean to in any way diminish the importance of coral reefs, but knowing what we now know about the magnitude of our ignorance of the deep sea, even the deep coral reefs that we usually don't think of as coral reefs, they're just deep coral systems, but they're not reefs in the same sense. But Fred Grassley was part of the team of scientists. He was a graduate student at the time, but it was Howard Sanders, Fred Grassley, and a few other heavy hitters who were working in deep water in the North Atlantic and finding in a place you can embrace with your arms diversity that is comparable to what you find in shallow tropical systems, shallow water. And the thing is that, yes, in coral reefs, but it's also true in the deep sea. It's true in open seawater off Bermuda, in a place that you can embrace with your arms, you can find. And scientists have found, including Larry Maiden, again from Woods Hole, looking at what looks like, clear water, this is clear glass of fresh water, but ocean water, 14 phyla of animals swimming around, plus microbes of various sorts. How many divisions of animals live in all of the land put together and all of freshwater as well? About 15 phyla. So in a place this big in the ocean, you can find about as many phyla, big divisions of animal life, as you can find in all the rest of the world on the land and freshwater put together. That's mega diversity. Now, species-wise, we're just beginning to wrap our minds around what constitutes species now that we have new methods of looking beyond the anatomical differences that have characterized how we've determined species in the past, but now using methods to look at not just the form and structure, but the genetic makeup, that some things that look remarkably alike, like, let's say, bacteria. Kind of many of them look very similar superficially, but are very different, actually. And it's true of many of the crustaceans, like copepods and amphipods. How many species are there actually? With a straight face, can we say? We can say how many we know using traditional methods there are. So far in the ocean, according to the Census of Marine Life, it took thousands of scientists working over 10 years with funding from the Sloan Foundation and others that really tried to do a serious inventory, looking at past records, even old whaling records and museum collections, and conducting some surveys using new technologies in the 10-year period of trying to find out how many ocean creatures are there. They came up with something a bit north of 250,000, which is not as many species as there are known to be of beetles. So on a species level, looks as though insects have it, you know, articulated limbs down, wings down, whatever it is. But when you think that best estimates right now, we might have mapped as much as 20% of the ocean floor with the same degree of accuracy that we have for the moon and Mars and our own terrestrial backyard. And that doesn't have, that's not the ocean, that's just the bottom of the ocean. The ocean is the part in between the top and the bottom, the wet part. That's where most of life on Earth lives. And we've accessed maybe 5% of that in terms of exploring it and defining who's there, who lives there, how much of the land has been, there's still places on the land that we've given little attention to. Some places that are already gone that were around when I was a kid. We can't explore because they're clear cut or burned, or there's housing development on top of them or something. But the ocean, we still have a chance, even though we're ravaging the ocean with what we're putting into it and what we're taking out of it. All things considered, it's the best chance we have for maintaining planetary stability, to take the pressure off as much as we can, give nature a break.
Absolutely. And you already answered my next question, which was I got into oceanography because it was so new and unexplored, with maybe 5% of the ocean being understood, and everything from the flip-flopping poles measured in magnetic rocks in the spreading seafloor to just all of the mysteries. I can tell that you still feel the wonder and the amount of exploration there is still to find. Do you think that we can actually learn about these species before they're gone? Is there going to be a certain...
We've got some already. When I was a kid, there was a kind of monk seal in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. The last one was seen in 1952. I never got to see one. I didn't even know they existed before they were all gone. They're extinct. There's some monk seals, a related species, in Hawaii, some in the Mediterranean, but there are only 3 known species of this whole category of seals that have existed, and we've lost a third of that genetic information. But think about this. There's some species that have an ancient history that occupy a fairly narrow segment of the genetic makeup of life. Think about horseshoe crabs, for example. There are 4 species. Now, they're not crabs, they're related to arthropods, and some people regard them as a separate phylum because they are just so distinctive. But anyway, whether they're lumped in with spiders and scorpions or they have their own separate place, they do have at least a separate class equivalent to the class we think of as insects. Insects have gazillions of species that have a recipe for, 2 pairs of antennae, wings, 6 legs, a head, a thorax, and abdomen. Those are characteristics that define insects in many variations. There are 4 species of horseshoe crabs for this entire recipe for distinctive life. If we lose one of them, that's a quarter of that recipe for life that's gone forever. And all of them are on the line right now, especially the 3 Asian species, but even the one that lured me into the ocean when I was a kid on the New Jersey shore many years ago. Their numbers have precipitously declined. We use them for bait to catch eels to export to Asia. We use them to squeeze the blood out of them for pharmaceutical testing. even though there are valid alternatives, you don't have to drain the blood out of horseshoe crabs to get the wonderful chemistry solutions that we need to do the critical testing that is valuable to us, but we still do it anyway. Because why? Horseshoe crabs are free. All wildlife we account for with a zero accounting base. They're free groceries. Let's go get them. Anybody can go. And we even subsidize the commercial extraction of wildlife from the ocean. We pay people to go kill wildlife. And we encourage them with marketing to go kill ocean wildlife. On one hand, we're saying, save the carbon, keep it in the ground. But on the other hand, we're saying, go get the ocean carbon, fillet it, roast it, put it on the Barbie, do whatever you want. But we don't have our heads on straight about life in the ocean, that's for sure.
There's a couple of excellent books about horseshoe crabs and their demise. And it was, I think, the red knot, a bird that declined that was eating the eggs of the horseshoe crabs. And it was birders who discovered those red knots declining that drew this to our attention, because you're exactly right. It's just free. Anything you could grab from the ocean, and especially things like horseshoe crabs that aren't charismatic megafauna, people felt like they could use it ad infinitum.
Squids and octopus,
which is
cephalopods. There are maybe 300 that we know about, at least twice as many that we don't know about, based on how many new ones we keep finding. But we just think of them as bait, as products, grind them up, squeeze the oil out, and turn it into chicken food or food for salmon. I mean, what a disgrace to our, think about seeing octopus on a menu. And then if you see the film, My Octopus Teacher, how do we balance our disparate view of ocean life?
Well, and that, the whole idea of fisheries and how many people the protein from fisheries supports, that certainly can get involved. A lot of people don't seek out sustainable fish. And
sustainable fish, what do you think is sustainable?
I can't think of it. There's almost nothing I can think of, and that has been changing for years. Each time we have a sustainable fishery, it gets overfished, and then that fish ends up declining, and we go to the next one. So whether it's aquaculture fish or fish that have short lifespans, it's very hard to. There are a few that are more responsible. Do you think that we should start thinking about having no fishing? How do you think there's a sustainable fish or fishery?
I think we have taken the level of ocean wildlife down to such a point that we should make individual choices. It's really hard because it's legal to, not only legal, but we subsidize the industrial extraction of wildlife from the sea. We don't subsidize or think it's legal to take songbirds out of the sky, but it's equivalent. These are wild animals. They're not, we account for them as free goods. Go get them. If you don't get them, somebody else is going to go get them. That's the rationale. But the idea that it's necessary to feed people, look, I try to do what a scientist does. I look at the evidence, and I continue to keep asking. So who really needs to consume ocean wildlife for sustenance? Who needs to? Look at where is food security a true issue with what we take from the sea? And I'm ready to concede that there are some communities, some coastal dwellers, island countries, who have come to rely for, people throw up the word protein, but every living thing has protein. It's just the definition of life. So lettuce doesn't have much compared to, say, a lima bean, but It's there, or else it wouldn't exist. It's like carbon is essential ingredient of life. All living things have it. And we misuse, I think, the justification, I've got to have fish to get my protein, as if it's yours to, to get, when the fact is we don't have to eat animals at all to be healthy, wise, and well. But it's okay, so it's a cultural or it's a choice, but it's not a necessity. So get over calling it food security, except for those for whom it really is a necessity. And there are some, especially in this world where there are now, oh goodness, close to 8 billion of us, that what once was available in large quantities to feed fewer people, now there are a lot more people and much reduced capacity of the world to support us, especially with wild things, whether it's wild plants or wild animals. We succeed by growing things, and people say, aquaculture. And I think smart aquaculture might. What do you think?
I think, yeah, I co-edited a book about 20 years ago on aquaculture, where I had aquaculturists from all over the country together with environmentalists and lawyers. I've talked to Sandra Shumway quite a bit about this. I think with the resilient coastlines, where you have linked systems, where you're looking at algae, fish, oyster beds, and a actual system instead of individual animals. I think there are some success stories. We go back and forth whether it should be in the ocean or on land. On land, you can control the waste products. So the problem with a lot of aquaculture,
and they're not wasted.
Right. And you could reuse them. And the idea of feeding fish to make bigger fish. I mean, there are all kinds, but there are more efficient and much more, you're just taking and bioamplifying these problems by having very expensive fat fish. So there are some species that can be aquacultured responsibly. And I think some people are doing that, but there's also easy ways to do it that aren't good for the environment. There's salmon species and salmon diseases that have been caused from runaways and from jailbreaks.
When you think about, okay, let's think about all of these animals in the ocean. Let's look at what has worked with all the thousands of animals on the land. Which ones do we choose over thousands of years? Which ones have come through the test of time to be successful, cultivated creatures?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is an herbivore.
Mm-hmm.
We don't raise lions and tigers. We don't raise top carnivores.
No, not tuna or salmon.
No. And salmon is a great example. You hear the salmon farmers say, well, we have a 4-to-1 ratio of how much food we have to give to get a pound of, 4 pounds of food will get a pound of salmon. Well, even that is kind of a crazy business model. You've got this many fish to make this many fish.
It makes no sense.
But it's really not, when you've got to think about it from the beginning. When you talk about the animals we raise, they're not carnivores, they're plant eaters. So we're talking sunlight plants chicken, sunlight plants goats, sunlight plants sheep, sunlight plants cow. And it works, sort of. Now, and they mostly don't mind crowding, they're easygoing, good-natured, they don't tend to eat one another. And they grow fast. They go to market. Chicken in less than a year, cows a year or so, sometimes 2. So where are their aquatic equivalents? Can't we learn from thousands of years of analysis on what works on terrestrial systems to apply to the ocean? Salmon don't come anywhere close to being a good model. If you go back to the beginning, looks like sunlight plants to get to a fish. It's not a straight shot. Sunlight, phytoplankton, zooplankton, a whole soup of different kinds of little, again, maybe 15 phyla of animals in the plankton. They're eating the phytoplankton. You get eaten by bigger phytoplankton or zooplankton that eat little fish, and eaten by bigger fish. And then you get to a fish that a salmon might notice. And along the way, there's this consumption of energy. The ratio is something on the order of you burn 90%, you retain 10%. It varies somewhat, but that's the general rule of thumb. Most of it gets burned, some of it gets retained. So when you come out the end, looking at what does it take to make a tuna, it's been in the ocean. Well, to get a mature tuna, bluefin, it's according to Barbara Block at Stanford, who's really spent a lot of time looking at the life history of bluefins and other creatures, that it's on the order of 10 to 12 years to get a full-grown reproducing bluefin. 10 years of eating fish that have eaten fish that have eaten fish that have eaten, ultimately get down to plants. And the conversion along the way, with 90% of the energy lost in what it takes to keep an animal moving, and about 10% gets retained. So we're talking on the order of thousands of pounds of phytoplankton, tens of thousands of pounds to make a single pound of a 10-year-old tuna. And so you can back it up. Maybe it's only 6 years old. So maybe it's only, 6,000 pounds, a few tons of phytoplankton. But for chicken, 2 pounds of plants to make 1 pound of chicken that is, let's say it's a year old. And cows, it's something on the order of 20 pounds. Pigs, goats, sheep are somewhere in the middle. But
Precisely.
it's, we learned a long time ago, raising carnivores is not efficient, but because wildlife is free, of course it isn't, we count for it free, go get it. If you're hungry, go fishing. But you're taking from the fabric of life that keeps all of us alive.
Very well put. I'm going to switch gears a little bit just to address something I'm concerned about, and Noah's concerned about, and many scientists are. That is hard for lay audiences to grasp, and that's the change in ocean, or the recent ocean acidification. The fact that the ocean is absorbing carbon dioxide, and that we as humans have drastically changed the ocean. I think last I looked, it was 0.075 pH lower, which is impacting shell fisheries and all kinds of fish species, phytoplankton, the ability for cells to actually absorb and make food. How do you, as far as a concept, how would you describe it to help people understand how shocking this is, and where do you see the science going with that?
Well, if I were an evil alien wishing to alter the nature of life on Earth, get rid of those dreaded humans, and worry about impact on everyone else. So 2 things I would do. I'd change the temperature and I'd change the chemistry. Boom, everything changes. We're not evil at heart. We're not alien, we live here. We're changing the temperature and we're changing the chemistry. And one of the most pervasive ways of changing the chemistry, it's not just the trash, the junk, the garbage, the toxic materials, the pesticides and herbicides and all of that we're allowing to flow into the sea or deliberately putting there. It is the profound change through putting the burning of fossil fuels, putting excess carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that is absorbed largely by the ocean, but with consequences. We're at a point now where the ocean continues to absorb, but there's a point where it can't take up more, and carbonic acid has formed, continues to form, driving a trend toward increasing acidification. That is bad news. And yes, I am concerned about oysters and clams and the backbones of fish. And what I mostly am concerned about are the little guys that most people tend not to think about, but they rule the world, frankly. generate most of the oxygen in the atmosphere. They have over billions of years, and they still are at it, churning out oxygen, capturing carbon dioxide, but change the pH, the acidity of the ocean, there will be winners and losers. For some of those minute organisms, it's like, yes, I like it the way it is, and they prosper, they flourish, they get to be more abundant than they have been for many millions of years. And the ones that have been in place during our time, up to favorable moment in Earth history, it's just right for us. Saying, no, I'm going to go into hiding until things turn around. They might never disappear, but go into a state that is no longer the dominant or important part of the ecosystem. And you can look at a glass of water and say, this is an ecosystem. Well, even this glass of water probably is, but especially ocean water, it's a minestrone of creatures that are mostly so small that you don't see them without help and magnification. And one of the most important categories, a group of bacteria called Prochlorococcus, was not discovered until 1986, when Penny Chisholm at MIT and her colleagues used a different method for assessing phytoplankton and discovered this itsy bitsy teeny tiny little green blob that you don't see with traditional means of microscopy. You need the special means of finding them. And they don't look like much except just a little tiny jewel-like blob of green. But they exist in, I mean, numbers that baffle, think about stars in the sky. How many are there? How many Prochlorococcus cells are there out there in the ocean? And they're feeding some of the creatures such as krill. And they don't do it alone, they're diatoms. The organisms that actually have a calcium carbonate shell, coccolithophorids, for example. These are creatures that rely on having calcium carbonate accessible to them in the water. They can make noise or clam. And that's, good the cells that generate oxygen and capture carbon dioxide that are critical in terms of maintaining a favorable climate for us. And you say climate in coccolithophorids and foraminifera and Prochlorococcus, what's that word? Yeah, now we know things that no one knew when I was a kid, but we are so lucky. We're the beneficiaries of Penny Chisholm working over here, somebody else working over there, somebody else working in Antarctica, somebody else up there in the sky, and the computer dudes had the capacity to gather all of this together, and we can for the first time begin to see patterns that even the smartest people who ever lived prior to the current time could not see. First of all, we didn't have enough data points, and secondly, we didn't have the capacity to analyze them, but now we do. That, I think, is great good news, and we should all be excited about our opportunity to use what we now know to go from decline to recovery, and to realize that maybe half the coral reefs are still in pretty good shape, and we still have 3% of the bluefin tuna in the Pacific, and maybe even more. There might be as much as 10% left in the Atlantic. It's not much as compared to 1970, but hey, they're not all gone. They're still sharks. Some species are down to less than 1% of what was there before the appetite, the market for long-lining sharks for their fins. That means really about 1980 was when that trend began. Think of the magnitude of our power to alter the nature of nature in the wink of a geologist's eye. And we have all that power, let's use it productively.
For good. Yeah, that's one of the things that most shocked me with that change in acidity is, how when people say we can't affect the planet, we can. We've affected
We
it
have.
one way and we can affect it the other way. Time's going quickly, so I want to ask about two more things and then we'll switch to taking some questions from the audience. I want to give you a moment to talk about your hope spots, which are really starting to make a difference. I read recently that in the Deepwater Port facility at Smith Bay, Australia, they were going to do a timber plantation project. And because there was a hope spot nearby and people were aware of it, that they actually denied their permit to create this timber facility that would have really affected the nearshore coastal area and their own fisheries. But tell us all a little bit about hope spots. And then after that, I'll have you talk a little bit about your book, and then we'll see what time it is and start taking some questions.
Well, let me quickly just kind of reverse it, because the book that is coming out in November, it's National Geographic Ocean, a Global Odyssey. Every chapter features a hope spot and provides a kind of the rationale for why we should be optimistic about the future because of what we now know. And the idea behind hope spots is to embrace the systems and, of course, the species that are out there still around. We still have them, to look at them with a new value and do everything we can to not lose what we already have and to restore what we can. So hope spots, it's a name given to something that a lot of people have been working toward, myself included, ever since it became obvious that we are degrading the planet at a level, at a pace that puts our lives at risk, everything we care about. If we fail to take care of the systems that make breathing possible, that ensure a favorable climate, the water cycle, the nitrogen, basic stuff that it's not, I mean, it seems like it's cutting edge science in some ways, but it's, when you really get it, a kid, it gets it right away. I mean, I learned about the water cycle in very different terms, but how evaporation from trees and from the water goes up in the clouds and falls back as rain, sleet, and snow. I mean, that was known many years ago, but now with an edge, because the ocean, we now know, is the source of most of that stuff in the clouds and the rain, sleet, and snow. And we've just shifted our focus to, it's the ocean that dominates these systems. It's the ocean that dominates climate. Even the climate discussions that began some years ago, it wasn't until the climate conference that was hosted by Chile, that took place in Spain, just, the last climate conference, and now this one coming up in November, we'll have the ocean front and center. But when I served as the chief scientist of NOAA, it was kind of intended to try to get atmospheric scientists and ocean scientists together. This really started in 1970 to really, because atmospheric is working up here and ocean scientists working down here, as if they never connected. And you get terrestrial scientists over here. Hey, let's get it together. We're trying to do that with hope spots, to understand that everything affects everything else, everywhere, all the time. And that people on the ground are now enlisted by Mission Blue, an organization that has been around for about 10 years now, a little more, to identify places that are in pretty good shape, coral reefs that are in still good condition. Let's keep them that way. And those that are degrading, well, let's see if we can take the pressure off so they can recover with the ingredients supplied by those places that are still in good shape. We haven't lost every Goliath grouper. In fact, they have come back a bit because we've stopped killing them. Although there's a move to start killing them again, because why? Well, there are more of them than there used to be. Like, yeah, so let's not backtrack. It's like one step forward and then they want to go 2 steps back. But I think the hope spots an idea that I think we've just given a name to a concept and given people such as those in Australia an excuse or something they could hold up and say, look, the world is with us. And if they did it all by themselves alone, they might not be heard as much as when they say there's a network of more than 140 places and people around the world. And so it's trying to get people to work together. Mission Blue has more than 200 partners. And while we work at the government level, I love going diving with some of the, like Tommy Rumingasau from the little island nation of Palau. We're dive buddies. And he really gets it that 80% of their entire exclusive economic zone is safeguarded for all life there. 20%, they try to manage it so that they can take some, but mostly not have it serve as a lot. If they keep a big bank account out there, 80% intact, they might be able to afford taking some for their local use. But once you start selling wildlife and thinking of fish like elephants or birds as money, then it's easy to cross the line. So that's, we're inspired by people who are taking the concept and basically running with it. And we're trying to back them up. And we celebrate that in the book. It isn't just about, well, first it's the ocean story, and then it's a story of life with a big 4-page double on both sides of the diversity of life in the ocean. It's where the action is, you know, it's the history of life on Earth. And then the last portion of the book is how the ocean affects us as humans and how we as humans are affecting the ocean and what we can do at this incredible point in history when we have the choice. What we do or what we fail to do will determine not just our future in the next few decades, but forevermore.
Absolutely. Well, I have a positive question, then a negative question. Let's dwell on the positive, and then I might take a few from there's some interesting ones in the chat. Do you see, both of us are in Society for Women Geographers, and one of the reasons I joined actually is because you're a member. But for many young women, I recruit a lot of young women to this. This is for people who don't know. This is the female version of the Explorers Club. When women were not allowed into the Explorers Club in the early 1900s, they formed their own club. And so this is, full of people like Sylvia and Jane Goodall and explorers and teachers and scientists. And just amazing women. I've done Zoom calls with them. We're all over the world, these 90-year-old women that climbed Everest, barefoot in their teens and are still living life alone in Colorado, places like that. It's very inspirational. And I'm always working with young women and young men to try to, share some of that excitement and knowledge. And I wondered if you had an anecdote or a short story about a young woman that inspires you and gives you hope, a hope spot version of a person, perhaps, or a group.
Dr. Eugenie Clark, who is also a SWG member, she had 4 kids, married to a doctor. She started a laboratory of her own in Florida with support from the Vanderbilts. And I met her when I was a teenager myself, and she just sort of took me under her flipper, and it made it look like, sure, you can do this. Anybody, you can have a family, you can cook wonderful meals, and you can do great science. And don't let anybody else tell you you can't. So she's one. And I think my original inspiration was not from a woman, it was from William Beebe. I read his book when I was a kid, and he described what it was like to go down half a mile under the sea where it's dark all the time, but the flash, the sparkle, the glow of living creatures that have bioluminescence. And I said, I really want to do that. It didn't matter that I'm a girl. Many years later, I actually was doing it with a submarine that I helped make happen. And I channeled William Beebe for many years. So you don't have to have a woman role model to be inspired to just keep going no matter what. It's that vision of, I'm a human being first and foremost. And I have had, mostly starting with my parents, who made me believe that I could never do anything so bad that they wouldn't be there for me. They had my back, no matter what. And it just gave me the courage to not worry about falling down or being denied things that should rightfully have been mine to do, but because I was a girl, couldn't do them. I couldn't be a chief scientist aboard a ship when I started out as a young oceanographer. It was just unthinkable. There are a couple of books that I've been reading recently that I really recommend to anybody who wants to look at the last few decades and how far we have come, but how tough it has been for some. One of them is by Meg Lohman. It's called The Arbonaut. Meg is a true star. I mean, she uses her natural primate abilities to climb trees, but she uses technology now to actually look at the canopy of trees. And I mean, it's just amazing that she persevered and has accomplished as much as she has. Imagine if she were a guy. Maybe people wouldn't notice so much if a guy had done what she's done, but she's done it against all, it's Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing, but Ginger Rogers doing it backwards in high heels and making it look really easy. The other book is, of course, Kathy Sullivan's book that she has just written about being a Skywalker, a woman version of Luke Skywalker, I suppose, who helped launch the Hubble spacecraft, was chief scientist and later the head of NOAA. And the book by Rita Caldwell, A Lab of Her Own. And it's a powerhouse. She was the first woman to be the head of the National Science Foundation, a marine microbiologist. But the way she actually made me realize, in retrospect, things that I didn't see when I was in the midst of it all. Being told I wouldn't be getting an assistantship at Duke University because I just get married and have kids, and it would be wasted on me. Guys really needed it, I didn't. And she went through the same saga, but she didn't set her back. I mean, it did set her back, but she kept going. And we should all keep going.
And these kind of stories are really helpful for young women and for young men, because it's still easy to be frustrated whether you're, no matter where you are in your life, it's easy to be frustrated and not getting ahead. And I'm a big fan of sharing these kind of stories and being inspirational, just because sometimes that's all one person needs to hear.
I think there was a moment when I realized that maybe I had almost made it in life. That's when I was at NOAA as the chief scientist, and one of the staff members came in one morning. He was just killing himself laughing. He said his 7-year-old son had been reading night after night this book that had been published by the New England Aquarium about Sylvia Earle, who lived underwater, who went out in little submarines, who dived with whales, who did all this stuff. And he said, "Dad, I mean, when I grow up, I mean, can boys do things like," I mean, it was like, talk about, yes, boys can do these things. And so
Awesome.
can girls.
I love it. We've only got about 15 more minutes, so I'm going to jump into a couple of questions here. There's thanks to everyone who's putting some great information in the chat. Please definitely check that. I'm proud of us for mentioning books because it is the Nantucket Atheneum that's sponsoring this. So good for us. One person asked, and I've heard this question before, if fish are contaminated with chemicals like PCBs and microplastics and now PFAS, which are everywhere, could that be enough to dissuade many people from continuing to eat them? And I would emphasize there are many parts of the world and Indonesia and small island nations where there are no choices to, I've been to some of these places and they are heavily contaminated and they simply don't have a choice. Everything's contaminated, both terrestrial and oceanographically. But yeah, do you think that that's going to slow people down?
I think it is having some effect once people know. Most people don't know. Beluga whales have no choice either. They have to eat fish. The peanut is not an option for them. Luckily, no way. I mean, it's a fish world out there in the ocean. That's the biogeochemical nature of the planet. It's a cycling of life. Going way back, we're all made of stardust, right? And it's, I love the comment from Carl Sagan that if you want to start from scratch to make an apple pie, you first invent the universe. So we start with stardust and we go back to stardust ultimately. And in the meantime, we make the best of it, enjoy the time we've got. And we are blessed with the capacity to know on a scale that the smartest creatures on Earth, other than humans, like sperm whales and elephants and dolphins and some really smart fish and birds, they can't know. And nor could our predecessors before right about now. And it's the knowing that will make us aware of where we have to change our ways, because our survival depends on it, our existence. We changed our ways when we discovered there's a virus out there that doesn't care about who we are, how talented we are, or what color we are, how tall, how short, how old, how young. And we were just a piece of meat and indifferent to everything else. And we changed. We're still changing. Can we integrate that into our thinking, even in small island nations, to realize we have to think differently about sustenance? Because through most of our early history, we had a plant-based diet because it was hard to catch animals to eat. And we ate very well, not always very well, but we had lots of vitamins and minerals that you don't get from animals. And so it's that everywhere in the world we have access to knowledge, that we can be more efficient and eat in healthier ways than ever before through cultivating the right things in the right places at the right times of the year, working with nature, not constantly consuming nature, and understanding that we have to change because our lives depend on it. And imagine if we did not know and we just kept consuming on until everything was gone, until the last coral reef sort of winked out. And the last two, we're pretty close to that level now, but there's still some we can. The evidence is there too that when we take the pressure off, recovery is possible. It will never go back to what it was, but it could be better than it is now. And I think about a country after a war, devastated, but recovery can happen when you stop the killing and start the caring and give a place a break, give nature a break. And that's what is starting to happen. The idea of having 30% of the land and 30% of the ocean at least embraced for either highly protected or fully protected by 2030, 10 years. We're on a crash course for survival by protecting our life support system and the creatures who make it up. who comprise a forest. Forest is not just board feet of lumber. And we should not just think of forest as trees, obviously. Trees can't survive without the fungi and the roots and the snails and the slugs and the moss and all of the things that make up an integrated system. And the same is true of insects. Oh my gosh, we so much need insects. You go to any grocery store, any hardware store, any gardening supply, and you can find 1,000 ways to kill insects and worms and snails. I mean, I despair. I just want to go clear the shelves and say, look, we need to look at life and think differently. Life is a miracle. We need to do everything we can to restore the integrity of systems that have been so damaged unwittingly, largely, about the consequences over the history of our species. But now we know. So,
And it does often help to remind, I mean, for people to think about their own health and try to reduce the amount of chemicals they use. We have several other really good questions in here, and my dog is also contributing to the questions. Yeah, the dog's probably concerned about this too, because he likes to eat plastic all the time. But Siffy asked, any thoughts, and this is one of the most insidious things in the last few years. I mean, it's been building up since The Graduate, but any thoughts on plastic in the oceans? How can we help stop it? That's a $64 million question there.
Because we're addicted, and it's integrated into our synthetic materials. It really began to amp up seriously starting in the 1940s. And now they're pervasive. And they're in the air you're breathing, the food you're eating, the water you're drinking. It doesn't matter what you eat, but if you're eating top carnivores from the ocean, you're getting a more concentrated dose because it's called bioaccumulation. Further up the food chain, the more stuff gets accumulated in them. But even in tiny little copepods and little tiny fish, they're sometimes, I mean, you don't because their little guts are so stuffed with microplastics. And I think the biggest source right now, and it's a double whammy, it's the materials we're using to kill the ocean, the industrial scale fishing. Again, I'm not talking about people going out and catching dinner, but it's those who are catching megatons, wildlife measured by the ton, and sold as products, and with enormous bycatches, creatures that are captured and then just away, like bulldozing a forest because you want to capture the songbirds, you throw everything else. And we've done that now in an increasing scale since the 1950s, when we new technologies, new materials, plastics that are lightweight, relatively inexpensive. You can afford, if you get a rip in your net, just toss it, or often they're lost, but it's no big deal because they're relatively inexpensive as compared to when I was a kid. I used to watch some of the fishermen on the North Carolina coast making their nets. They had these special tools for weaving the nets they were using. You didn't want to ever lose a net because it was your life's work was in, you really treasured them. Today, the ocean is clogged with these throwaway goods, and we think about straws, and we should. We think about cups and plates and forks, plastic, single use, this and that and the other thing. But the really big stuff, the long lines, thousands of miles of long lines lacing the ocean, when they're lost with baited hooks every few feet, they're just killing machines. But the drift nets and just the bottom trawls, the crab trap, lobster traps, they tangle whales, they tangle lobsters, of course, that never go to market because they get lost at sea, but they keep on killing. I mean, how do we, is it that we condone not only taking of wildlife, but taking them with such extravagant methods of killing and destructive methods that keep on killing for decades? You know, nets that were lost in the 1960s that are still out there sweeping the ocean, killing animals. It's a wonder, I think, sometimes that there's still fish left in the ocean when you think of the increased market for ocean wildlife. And the fact is, you look at the numbers that, okay, this population has crashed, so we'll go further offshore, we'll go deeper. And now we're eating fish from Antarctica, the Patagonian toothfish, otherwise known as Chilean sea bass, but their numbers are crashing too. Orange roughy. Nobody knew what an orange roughy was. Scientists call them slime heads. I just wish they'd be marketed as slime heads. Maybe nobody, but nobody should. These are animals that live older than great parents. And they can, anyway, they are being eliminated faster than they can recover.
Absolutely. Well, we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to ask a question that I'm sure is on many people's minds, because you go from, it's easy to go from despair to hope, despair to hope, as individuals and as citizens of the planet. The more that we can have, value assigned to the oceans, whether it's an ecosystem services, there's a lot of tools that are used. But one person asked, and I think this is an important question, and what everyone thinks of is, do you have any recommendations for what the average person or family can do to help the ocean, from daily habits? And you've alluded to a lot of them, so I think we can bullet point some of these, to direct efforts and interaction to organizations that are making an impact. And some of the things you've been talking about, eating lower in the food chain, more of a plant-based diet, reducing your use of plastics, being, aware and sharing these stories. But are there other things, being supportive of protection of offshore areas? But are there a few more that you'd like to mention? And then I'd want to get to 1 or 2 others, and then I think we'll be out of time, unfortunately.
The number one thing I think that everyone should start doing is take a moment and look in the mirror and ask yourself that question. Because nobody can tell you better than you can tell yourself what you're good at, what you care about, what potential you have. Some people have power in one direction and some in others. Some have a way with words, some with music, some with numbers. Some are leaders of their community. Some people have kids, some are teachers. Whatever you are, you're the one who should say, okay, here are the problems. I'm going to take this piece and do what I can and put my, whoever it is, the special me that is unique in the whole universe, and do something to go from this to recovery. And I'm going to get somebody else on board too, to use their power. It's how movements get underway. That's how the plastics revolution toward not just embracing it with, the wonderful materials, but there's a downside we need to fix. And there's some people who are really out there going flat out on that topic. I really am looking at trying to embrace natural systems, whether it's parks on the land, policy overarching the way we treat animals and plants, science, investing in discovery, exploration, whatever. Find that thing that makes you you and then use it. But don't ever give up on thinking that it's hopeless, because if you do, that's a problem. It means you won't even try. And then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're part of the problem if you give up.
That's so well put. And I get that question from so many people, whether they're celebrities or regular people. They're like, what still gives you hope? And people and people's will, the love of people that people have for our planet and for the ocean, our abilities, our brains. I mean, we got ourselves into this, we can get ourselves out. But it's having the will and not giving up hope. I really appreciate that. There's a lot more great questions. There's one that is really that we don't talk about enough yet. Karen Barton asks, in your travels, do you meet any politicians who talk about the concept of intergenerational equity when designing ocean policies? And there's all kinds of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion inputs that scientists are now embracing, which I think is really important. And a lot of those are intergenerational. Not only what are we leaving for our children, but how do we help them reach the goals? I mean, we've taken all these resources. She continues on. My 11-year-old son just watched Chasing Coral and is now taking a dive class. And this topic has come up in terms of fairness to future generations. And this is a really great question, Karen. I appreciate that. Another SWG member out there in the audience. But this is one that people might not know about. So, and then after this question, I've got one from Jenny Nelson and then hard stop.
President Obama once said our highest priority must be keep the world safe for our children. Just thinking guns and things, but the question is, keeping the world, the natural world, safe. Right now, it's not safe. And climate change, the degradation of air, water, the fabric of life itself being shredded. It's not a good time, but it may be in some ways it's the best time, because now we know, armed with a superpower of knowing, we can really strategically make decisions with the help of some leaders. And I am going to be meeting at the climate conference in Scotland in a few weeks with a group called the Blue Leaders. These are people who do care about intergenerational equity. They do care about the kids. I had the privilege of going to Antarctica in 2019 with the president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera. No leader is, one would say perfect, which means that you agree entirely with everything they do. But he is really forward thinking in terms of keeping the planet safe, and has been instrumental, along with his predecessor, a woman who was the president of Chile on 2 different occasions, and so was President Sebastián Piñera, twice the president, about embracing land and sea with care, realizing that this is what will keep our children safe, keep us safe, hold the planet safe. 40% of the waters in the territorial waters of Chile are protected. It exceeds the 30% that is a goal for nations around the world. And he said, this is the first time that we've known the magnitude of the danger we're in, and it may be the last time we have to do anything about it. So he's motivated, and he motivates people around him. Oh, they're not alone. There are others.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. We had a local question and also a question about women in science. So Jenny asked us, how do you, I got to speak to Expand Your Horizons group of young women last year about the book Lab Girl. And it was, it's a great book. And a lot of, I think life is so much easier actually for young women than it was for my generation or for our shared generation. But what does it mean to be a woman in science? For me, I think just being yourself, and you've talked about this, and I don't really worry too much about being a woman in science. And when I first started off in oceanography, I was short and people didn't think I could carry heavy things. And you just have to get out on deck, which I have many pictures of, and you just jump in and do it. And guys quickly figure out, hey, you're a normal human being, so that often. Huh?
Or carry the bags.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. But a lot of them have, entrained in their thinking, oh, I've got to, be the guy and help pick up the thing, and you just jump in and do it. But also telling your story and reminding people that girls like to get dirty, girls, can swim, that there's no, there's nothing that should stop your daughter, your son, or any child, no matter how they identify, from doing what they feel is exciting and fun and important to them and using their talent. So it's mainly modeling some of these things and helping girls to understand that math isn't scary. There's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of things that are put in young girls' ways.
Learned concept. It's learned. And it's learned because people we respect tell us that they tell us that it's fun to kill too. You know, we give kids guns to play with. What's with that anyway? The joy of killing stuff, including one another. And babies don't start out having biases, gender biases. They don't have the fun of going out and annihilating other forms of life or other people. We encourage it, we teach it. So I think we're maybe on the cusp of emerging into a new way of looking at ourselves in the context of the natural world, that we are vulnerable to the laws of nature. I think if you want to be a scientist, be a scientist. Don't worry about it being a girl scientist or a boy scientist. Just do what you can to be the best you can at whatever it is you do, whether it's musician or artist or teacher or whatever rocks your boat. But don't let somebody else tell you can't, because you're too tall, you're too short, you're a girl, you're a boy, you're too old, too young. I mean, I'm hitting the age bias now. That you can't do that, or you're not going to be around long enough to see this through. So come on. It's like, you should be retired. Retired to do what? It'll never stop. There will always be people who will tell you you can't do that, because don't let them get away with it. That means they win. And you should not be suppressed the wonderful thing that whoever it is you are. Let it get out and grow and be as much of a force for nature as you can be. And it's girl or boy or petunia, doesn't matter. I think enjoying the miracle of life is what it's about.
That's really well put. There was other great questions about dead men's fingers, Codium flagella. I tried to answer a couple of those in the chat. I've written about that. If you Google Oktay plus dead man's fingers, you'll read a little bit about that.
It's like a Halloween trick.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, one of the things that's so great about questions like that, actually, and we've got several people in the crowd too that are also doing beach cleanup, is spend time at the ocean, looking at the beach, getting into the ebb and flow of not only the tides, but of creatures that wash up. You're going to have large wash ups of Codium flagella's dead man's fingers as a combination of what the chemistry is looking like in the ocean. It grows very quickly. It provides great habitat, actually, for a lot of invertebrates. It's a native, so don't panic. When you see a lot of this washed up, sometimes it's just a pretty big storm like Hurricane Ida coming in and ripping them all up. But don't panic about things like this, but have your eyes open and when you're out on the beach.
Ask questions. Never stop.
Yes, exactly. And one person said, I'm on a beach, but it's the most impactful way we can help protect the ocean and the systems we and other life need for our health and the very survival.
What we can do is keep these questions and follow up with them.
Yeah, I put my email actually in the chat. I do want to, you should be retired. Retired to do what? That's right. I'm not retiring either, even though my husband's probably listening in and cringing.
Doing what I've been doing for most of my life. Why stop when you're having fun?
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to thank once again the Nantucket Atheneum and Anne and Amy and Janet for having us here. They were pretty we just have a limited amount of time. So I think we're out of time, though, if any of you three want to bounce on and say if we can chatter on some more. But thank you all so much for coming, and the Geschke family for sponsoring this talk and giving Sylvia and I a chance to reconnect, because I haven't seen her in 7 or 8 years. So
Let's go diving. Let's go get wet.
yeah, that would be awesome.
Go to Nantucket.
Well, I'll be there at P-Town too, so you can come and I'll be hopefully trying to remove some of that ghost gear that is endangering the humpbacks and right whales. It's such a big problem. And fortunately, people are using that gear now and spending time and money to remove it and make art out of it. So you mentioned artists and videographers and singers, and you can use all of your talents to tell these stories. And I think that's one thing that's been really great about everything from Zoom to all of this content is that. And get Sylvia's new book. It's coming out in November. It's 520 pages. It's incredibly thorough. Huh?
It's a good doorstop.
I can't wait to get it. I actually am really glad to see this giant compendium of information. And there's so much happening in the ocean. I think it will be really helpful for people. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you.
Oh, and with you. Let's definitely get together, and with all of you.
I would love
It's
that.
great to do the Zooming.
And I'd just like to thank Sarah and Sylvia for this great conversation. You've given us a lot to think about, and for giving us your time. So thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.